Welcome to Threatsafe. This is our podcast to help SMEs and SMBs and the people who manage IT within those businesses or responsible for IT to get the very best from the technology that they deploy and then also to manage their cyber security. Let's listen to this week's podcast. Hello everybody, welcome to Threatsafe episode 30. I'm Martin Roberts and
I'm Toby Stevenson.
Toby, last week we were talking about business continuity and disaster recovery, obviously in light of the awful things that happened in Spain. And we said this time we'd talk about cloud services.
Yeah, okay.
And one of the things we say that the cloud is not some mythical place. It's actually just somebody else's server in a server room in a data center somewhere in the world. Owned by somebody else. You're just renting space on it.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of assumptions, I think, by cloud services. I mean, there's obvious ones that we get, we use all the time, like Office 365, and you may have Google apps and things like that. But that people do make some assumptions around these things, which we need to sort of make sure that you're not loads of
They do, and some of these assumptions can be quite costly or painful.
Yeah.
When the truth and the reality comes to bite, if you've made those assumptions.
Yeah. So talk about Office 365, for instance, as an example. You sort of think that, well, I've got it all there. It's all online. I don't need to worry about backups. I don't need to worry about anything. It's just going to be there. Is that absolutely true?
No, it's not. And actually, for all of the Microsoft Cloud services, and other cloud providers are the same. They operate something called the shared responsibility model. And so essentially what they're saying is that some bits are their problem and some bits are your problem. And almost invariably, every single time, the data is your problem. So in the case of Office 365 or Microsoft 365, that particular SaaS platform, that software as a service platform, if that goes down as a result of something that Microsoft do, they will commit to putting it back in the same state it was when it went down.
Fair enough.
Which sounds fair enough.
Yep.
What they won't cover you for is if you have somebody that goes and deletes a load of stuff out of SharePoint or deletes a load of emails or something like that. Now, there are some standard recovery tools that are built into the platform, but ultimately it's not on Microsoft to get that stuff back. The data is invariably you as the customer. It's your responsibility. And that's one thing that we often run into, less so these days, but people seem to think, well, my data's in 365, it's all backed up, it's safe. Technically, it's not totally true. That data, if you make a mistake with the data, then that's on you to sort that out. Microsoft say they have some limited recovery capabilities, but it's not their responsibility to let you get that stuff back.
So is it fair to say that as standard, you're not, so if you had an on-premise server and you had tapes please don't get tapes, and you had a device which was backing up to, and you could say, I'll back up every 10 minutes. And that allows you, in theory, to go back to a point in time, say before a disaster or before somebody was infected, you can go back there and go, right, start again from this point. That's entirely possible with on-site infrastructure and all of that. Actually, sort of in cloud, but is that possible with Office 365 out of the box?
No, it's not. Not out of the box. No, it's not. No, there's the equivalent of like the recycle bin.
Right.
So if you delete stuff, there is a chance you can get it back by going to the recycle bin and pulling it back out.
But if you we call it the instance a tenant for a company, and they got attacked by somebody and infected by a phishing email, and somebody clicked on it and it started propagating through the system to customers, to suppliers, and whatever. It wouldn't be possible just to say, right, okay, actually go back to 10 o'clock this morning and start again.
It wouldn't. No, in most cases, that out of the box, they don't have that capability. So if all of your emails got encrypted, or all of your OneDrive got encrypted, or something like that, there would be some limited recovery capability. But out of the box, you wouldn't be able to easily and be guaranteed to be able to roll all that data back to before the incident happened.
And it's just an interesting point, is that the concept of logging onto your Office 365 mailbox and finding it's encrypted, even though Microsoft's looking after it for you. A lot of people will go, really? Is that possible?
Yeah, it is very much so. And Microsoft are not monitoring what you're doing. If you want to go in and delete a load of emails, they're not going to stop you doing that, because there'll be people up and out saying, I can't delete my emails when I need to. So within the boundaries of that tenant, you can do pretty much what you like with your data.
You can, or other people can,
on your behalf. Yeah. So if your account gets compromised, then yes, someone can operate in your user context to do things.
So do Microsoft provide, for perhaps extra money, the ability to do backups, point-in-time backups, or do other people provide it?
The answer is yes to both. So Microsoft, in response to the variety and the number of third parties providing this 365 backup technology, Microsoft also have one now. The majority of third parties don't use Microsoft infrastructure, so there's kind of something nice about that. Your primary data is sitting in Microsoft's world, and let's face it would need to be something pretty chaotic for it to disappear. But knowing that you've got it in a different set of servers altogether is sometimes quite appealing.
Okay, so in that world, we've got the Microsoft instance, the tenant there with all your data in, all your emails, and that can be backed up to a separate organization entirely in a separate part of the world, which means that should that data center sink, blow up, or whatever, you could still get to that data at that point in time.
Yes, you'd have to restore it back into a new, or it's the same 365. You can't use it where it sits, but it's a backup of all the data.
Okay. So I discovered something really interesting last week, which was quite. So we use Azure. So, folks, Azure is, how best to describe it? Is it like it's a space you can rent on the internet?
Yeah, it's Microsoft's cloud platform. Essentially, all of their services, both commercial, business, and consumer, run in this Azure space.
Okay, so and you were very patient to explain this to me the other day. So we have a space in Azure, and what sits on that space, amongst many other things, but we've got one particular product. I won't talk about it. It's an old accounting system which went dormant, for the sake of argument, last year, 2 years ago actually. It has to sit there for legal purposes. We need access to it. Sometimes we need to go and have a look, but we're not adding any data to it because we're not doing any new transactions. It sits there. And somebody says to me, Martin, we need to expand the space in the Azure tenant for your application there. And I said, what? I did. I went, what? Why? Because let's face it, it's not doing anything.
Correct. Yeah.
Explain to me what's happening.
So because it's running and because it's an in-support operating system, it's receiving updates. And so they happen every month when Patch Tuesday comes around, and they put new software on and take a backup of the old piece, and it slowly starts just to add to the overall storage requirements. Even though it's not being transacted, we are consuming more disk space month by month on it. Because
I've got this, I want a better expression, a virtual server sitting on this piece of hardware somewhere in the world. The software updates provided by the company that provides the space for the tenant is consuming more space, so I have to pay more money to store exactly the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. It's one of those conundrums.
One could call it a conundrum. I could call it something else as well.
Racketeering. No,
absolutely not. No. So that's interesting. But this is true of all spaces, because you can go and do AWS, you can do this.
Google, and there's rafts of them, and ultimately, if you are having a server instance running there, that's going to be getting updates, and it's going to be consuming disk space, and it's going to be updating the software that's on it. So things may stop working. That's always a possibility. If that data is really important, you should still be backing up, even though it's technically not changing, because if that server has a problem because of an update or runs out of disk space and it crashes something, then so there's a whole husbandry conversation to have around servers that you kind of like archive and sit in one corner.
Okay, because we've gone through this absolute revolution, and which was obviously speeded by the pandemic. But suddenly, I remember when people say the cloud, and people go, "Oh, what's it about?" And then suddenly it's like, oh, and now it's the de facto way of going. It's like your first thought is, rather than going to invest £20,000 or £30,000 in a new server and putting it in a space which is safe and all those things, which is still good things to do. And there's a school of thought which says some of this might be coming back over time, simply because of these costs, and the flexible nature of these costs, and we'll talk about that in a few seconds. People just run to the cloud, but actually it's far more. The transaction is easy, in theory. The cost control isn't necessarily.
No, and actually, if you take the commercial side out of it, there's a lot to be said for putting things into cloud servers. And I think it's important to kind of differentiate the difference between cloud servers and a software as a service application, something that you consume. So the an explanation would be Microsoft 365 is a software as a service solution. It's a SaaS application. You are a consumer of the software, but actually you don't really have to poke it or kick it or do anything to it. You just use it. Infrastructure as a service, which is at the other end of the spectrum, is what we commonly refer to as cloud servers. And there you have much greater control over the environment, because you can see the server and the files that are on the disk. You can't see the files that are on the disk in whatever's hosting your 365 environment, but they're there somewhere. And it's that shared responsibility model, and it gets quite complex. But in this instance, Microsoft's responsible for the underlying servers in a 365 environment, but in an infrastructure as a service, you're responsible for the servers because you've got access to them.
You're just renting that space.
Exactly, to run in whatever you wish to do so. But the analogy would be M365 software as a service, you just consume it. But if you were to run an email server on a cloud server, that would be the same net effect, but you've got more administrative control and administrative overhead.
Okay, and just a quick aside now, I was going to run down this rabbit hole here, is about jurisdiction. Because we've just said that these servers, this space is sitting somewhere on the internet, which is same old. It's somebody's server sitting in somebody's data center somewhere in the world. Is there? Can you specify where you would like that to be hosted?
You can with most cloud providers, yes, you can. And for obvious reasons, you would want to have it as close to you as possible, partly because it's going to be faster, because you've not got your connection has not got as far to go, but you've also got data protection laws that apply to the location where the server is residing. So if you have your server and your data in the UK, you're governed by GDPR, the Data Protection Act, and all those great things, and the ICO oversees all of that. If you have your servers in Outer Mongolia or the Antarctic or somewhere like that, you're governed by whatever the data laws are there. So it's one of the reasons why historically some people have been concerned about having their data stored on a server located in the US, because although steps are afoot to change some of this, they don't have the equivalent of GDPR. So their law enforcement and their government is able to request a lot more than say they could do in the UK.
Okay. So that's that rabbit hole. We're back out of it now. Okay. So now, so we've talked about the software as a service model, the Office 365, things like that, and the backups, and that you need to think hard or take advice to make sure that you've got the appropriate strategies in place to actually back up your data and to recover it if needs be. Obviously, for a cloud infrastructure as a service, i.e., I'm buying I want it to look like a server, but be on somebody else's infrastructure. You're taking a great deal more responsibility and defining your strategy more, and they need slightly different strategies and different approaches and skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that you find when you start going down this particular route is that some of it is familiar and some of it is very not familiar. So you get a virtual server, but a lot of the things, like the way that the network and the storage is presented, is very different to what you'd expect if you have your own server.
Stop. Okay, because we're talking about this thing, but again, this is for people this podcast, this video is for people who are responsible for IT, but not necessarily executing IT. You know, CFOs, CEOs, whatever, and you've got people telling you you need this, you need that. Difference between a physical server and a virtual server, Toby.
Well, a physical server runs on physical hardware.
Yeah.
And there's one instance of it running on that hardware.
Yeah.
A virtual server is running on top of a physical server, almost like in a little container.
Yeah.
Self-contained.
Yeah.
And it's become very popular because hardware is so powerful. Actually, you can run 2 or 3, often more virtual servers on a physical server.
And that could either be a local server which you own, or it could be a server somewhere in the cloud, somebody else's server.
Yes.
So you've got. Let's go back now to it looks different to somebody who manages them.
Yeah. So as a consumer of the server, you would see no practical difference.
Okay.
But as somebody that administers the server, there are some things that are familiar and the same as a virtual server that you would have yourself, i.e. the stuff that you connect into when you log on to the server and administer it. But because of the huge complexity and the distributed nature of the cloud, the underlying configuration is very, very different and a lot more complicated. So I think really the takeaway is there are different skills that are required.
Okay, so the point is, if you're managing a business where you have an IT person internally who's used to managing a physical box with maybe virtual servers on it, you can't make the assumption that they would be able to move that all to the cloud effortlessly.
No, I mean there would almost certainly be, unless they've experienced that before, there would be some learning curve, some learning and training that would be required by that team of people that would be looking after it.
So it would be unfair as a boss to turn around and say, "Hey, we decided to put it all in the cloud because it's going to be cheaper or it's flexible and all those things. Just go do it." Of course, you know, why use the cloud? Well, I mean, you know, it may seem obvious, but let's just state it anyway. You've got a choice every 2 or 3 years, if 5 years in some cases, and in terrible cases, 7 to 10 years, where you've got this application, your business line of business application, for instance, sitting on a box in your room, which is hopefully locked up and waterproof and all those things and fireproofed. To say, well, look, I'm either going to replace that server because I need to, and there's some dependencies here about whether the software, but in reality, you say, I'm going to replace it, I'm going to spend 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 pounds on that. It's a capex. You're going to capitalize it, and you're going to make that big investment for the next 5-7 years, and you take a big hit, and that's that application is last at that time. You've got to be careful about the sizing of that machine because you've got to make sure it's going to grow, it's going to have enough capacity for the next 7 years, etc. The cloud, in theory, if the application can actually operate on the cloud, you can move it to this space where actually you can take a small amount of space relatively, and then you can grow it as the business grows.
Yeah, scalability. I mean, a great analogy. If you think of your on-premise server as being a bucket, and you want to fill it with water, it'll only hold so much water.
Sure.
And the same applies for the server. You buy a server of a certain size, and you can only run so much stuff on it until it's full.
Yes.
Imagine the cloud as being a bucket with an infinitely deep bottom.
Yes.
Or for all practical purposes, infinitely deep. So you can just keep paying more money and putting more stuff in it, and it's never going to brim and overflow.
Now, the downside of that, as we learn as we go along, is that sometimes it's too easy to let that space expansion. So you know, with certain business systems, not a lot of systems actually, but business systems particularly, sometimes it makes sense to archive some of the old data because it doesn't need accessing immediately.
Yeah,
and actually you can extract it from the system and go and put it somewhere else, which is cheaper. Doesn't need access easily or whatever, and that will save you some money at the front end because you're not consuming so much today.
Yeah,
with that infinite bucket, and I forget how I use all those consonants in one go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other slight change thing is actually in Amazon Bucket is an actual thing.
Oh, okay.
In cloud speak. So ignoring that,
Okay.
it's from the analogy.
Yeah, but the whole point being is that it can seem easy just to leave it. It can just seem easy to leave it.
Yeah.
And all that happens is the bill goes up, and it goes up. How can we say it? Stealthily. It doesn't. An alarm doesn't ring every time the bill lands each month. I can tell you, folks. And the way to keep it is to, if you've got your accounting system will do this, and ours will. When certain levels are reached, we get a little alarm which says, "Hey, you're spending this much money in this account here." And it's worthwhile because that can happen quite frequently.
Well, I mean, there are in many of the cloud platforms, there are also native tools where you can do various alerting around billing activities such as that. So, the bill's gone up twice compared to what it was last month, or something like that.
Yeah, or percentage-wise.
And it'll flag up, and you can get a hand on it. But you're absolutely right. It's very easy for these things to grow, and all of a sudden, it is half as much as it was 6 months ago because you don't realise it's like that small incremental increase. So
okay. And I guess for a business, if you're trying something out for a while, a new product or whatever, not a service, because we talked about that separately, and you needed to run some installable software on a server. Great place to do it, really, because you don't have to invest in a great big server, but you
absolutely. I mean, two really good examples of where it can work. So let's say you're an organization, you've got a really old server, and you're planning on moving to a SaaS-based replacement. So you're going to move to something like Business Central or NetSuite or one of those cloudy line of business systems. But you're at 12, 18 months away from doing that. But you've got this really old server, it's got no warranty, it's failing, it's unreliable. We've seen it where customers will perform an interim transition to cloud services. That then gives them the advantage of having all the new stuff without having made a huge capex, which they're then going to scrap in 12 to 18 months.
Which is a really good investment.
Because the advantage of cloud services is you can take them on a pay-as-you-go. So Azure and Amazon all have per second billing. So literally, it's as long as they're on for is what you pay for, and not and no more. So that's one really good use case. And anywhere where the environment is volatile. So examples might be if you're in an industry where you have seasonal workers, and you need to make part of the environment bigger for 2 months of the year because you've got twice as many people putting orders on or dispatching goods or whatever. It's a couple of clicks in the cloud to do that. You reboot it, it comes back up with twice the memory and twice the processor, and the world's a happy place. And then you get past that busy period and you just resize it back down.
So I mean, part of it is there's always trends and things and major movements in this industry, and the cloud to some degree was enabled by improved communications. Because 20 years ago you wouldn't have thought too much about having cloud. Maybe I show my age. 25 years ago.
Because 20 years ago is actually in like the 2004.
Stop it. I know this. It's like people who start who are Anyway, but I remember sitting there with people in front of me saying, "Hey, this cloud." Well, they didn't call it cloud then; they called it something else. But it was like, "Hey, we could be able to do this." It's like, well, hang on a sec. What if the line goes down? Because it was, it wasn't. It wasn't that easy at that point. Now, to lose communication is a pretty bad thing. And as we talked about last week, there are multiple ways of getting to the cloud, getting to the internet, and therefore it does make it makes sense. Part of me gets a bit cynical about certain organisations taking money off you on a regular basis, and of course, the vendors like this. They prefer to bill you monthly on a pay-per-use basis because you're going to use more, and they haven't got that in the old world where when you renewed your licenses for your applications every 3 to 5 years, there would be that drought in between times when there'd be a big spend.
Yeah, well, I mean, the vendors, it stabilises their cash flow, doesn't it? And their forecasting.
Yeah. So, but on the whole, on balance, cloud is good, but make sure that you're aware of the potential pitfalls. One is, as SaaS services, you don't get things automatically being backed up and point in time backup and all those things. Yeah, and check the jurisdiction, folks. And the second part is, if you're doing infrastructure as a service, yeah, it can cost. It's very flexible and all those things. Keep your eye on it. Keep your eye on the billing. Look at the growth.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one advice I give to customers when I speak to them is that if you move to the cloud, you're not doing it just to save money, because there has to be other reasons for it, because it's not going to be, in most cases, not going to be cheaper than putting it in a cupboard in the corner of the office. That's the harsh reality of it.
Yeah.
But there are so many other advantages, and you have to weigh those up.
Yeah, you're not comparing apples with apples at this point.
You're not.
And what you've actually got, yes, is this whole point. You are not comparing like with like, and the things change in terms of the activities you're going to do and the priorities. Right, folks, we're going to call it a day right now, and the reason is the fire alarm's going off. Have you noticed that?
I heard something beeping.
Yeah, so I think we probably need to abandon the building. Oh no, we're okay. It's gone off. So either the fire got the alarm first, possibility. It's just gone again. So we'll see you next time. Thank you very much for listening and watching. If you have Threatsafe, thank you, Toby.
Thank you.
Very informative. And meanwhile, we're going to go and deal with our own little disaster here. Cheers, folks.
Thank you for listening to Threatsafe. We hope you found it enjoyable and informative. Please reach out with any comments, feedback, questions, and we look forward to seeing you soon.